I wonder how the tier list video is doing. So, you like tier lists, do ya? Well, boy do I have a tier list for you. Something interesting that I haven't really covered on this channel yet, but I've gotten a ton of requests to go over, and I think this will be a fun, engaging, and really interesting way to discuss this undiscussed topic. I'm talking about the dual class variant. What is a dual class variant? Well, in the Game Mastery Guide, you're given a bunch of different variant rules. I went over them a long time ago in this video if you want to go back and check it out, but one of them is specifically the dual class. Now, this is different from an archetype, and this one will make for some very powerful characters, where adding an archetype will give you a couple of sort of underpowered options for that level. The dual class variant allows you to pick two classes, as the name implies. When you pick both of these classes, you get all of the benefits of both. Are both of your classes spellcasters? Cool, you get separate spell lists and separate spell slots for both. Do you get expert in a saving throw from one class, but expert in a different saving throw from the other class? Congratulations, you're expert in both. You get the best aspect of both classes. You also get 2 feats per level to spend on each class. Dual class characters are on another level, especially if you combine the correct 2 classes. So today, just like the title implies, we are going to be covering the Fighter dual class tier list. I figure Fighter was a great place to start, as everyone knows what a fighter does, everyone knows fighters are amazing on their own, but which second class could make the fighter that much stronger? If you guys really love this, I'll do it for more classes going forward. I just figured the fighter was a great place to start. As you can see, we have our class tier list in front of us once again, and going from S to F tier, I'll be placing each class how I think they match with the fighter and just how strong I think they make it. It's important to note that all of these combinations will be stronger than a base fighter, so the rankings are going to be a bit skewed. You know, at the end of the day, the base fighter would be an F tier compared to the dual classes. Now, of course, you can't take fighter twice, so we're just gonna leave him out. You know what? We're gonna do what we're supposed to. There you go, buddy. You just rest down there. Now, unlike the class tier list, where it was really easy to gauge my own thoughts and opinions, I have written down a few notes here to help me keep my frame of mind when I'm talking about different classes. This is because there's a lot more to think about with dual classes, and honestly, all of this will still be partially affected by my experience and opinions. You know, when I'm thinking of these dual classes, I'm not thinking of every available feat and every available spell. So, you know, maybe one of these pairings would actually be S tier, but because if you combine this specific spell with this specific feat, you can make the fighter deal 1,000,000 damage. Maybe. Sure, I believe you. But I don't have that kind of time. So I'm mostly looking at class features and the ability to cast spells when taking them into account. How they cast them, where they cast them, when they cast them, and the general vibe the classes have when they mesh together. So, for that reason, some of these rankings might not be completely accurate to their power, but they are as accurate as I am willing to research. Without further ado, it's time for a sponsor.
Plot twist, I'm the sponsor, and my hair looks terrible, so I'm just doing it with this picture of me. Did you know that the Known at One store officially has holiday merch? All of our iconics that were so lovingly crafted by our artist Pataki Balaj have been outfitted with winter and holiday gear. So if you want these limited edition prints on shirts or mugs or wherever we sell them, get them now. At the end of December, they will be going away and probably won't be back until at the earliest next holiday season, 2022. They're adorable, they're lovely, and Pataki put amazing detail into holidayifying all of our precious iconics. So get them while you can, they're gonna be gone soon, and thank you so much for checking out the store.
So starting off, as usual, we're gonna go alphabetically, starting with our boy, the Alchemist. Now, judging by my class tier list, you might think, oh, he's just gonna shove the Alchemist in S tier. And no, I'm not. Unfortunately, I love the Alchemist, and an Alchemist plus a fighter is nasty because that gives them legendary weapon proficiency with their bombs. Not only that, they can buff themselves, apply mutagens, do whatever they want. This basically makes a fighter who can augment themselves. However, we still need to think about this in the grand scheme of comparing it to other fighter dual classes. For that reason, Alchemist is going in B tier. It's still really strong in having the options to make your own healing potions, make your own mutagens, throw bombs with legendary accuracy. It's all phenomenal, but this tier list is a bit more about strength and a bit less about personal opinion. So, unfortunately, I can't put the Alchemist above B tier in good conscience because there's just better options for the fighter. And on the subject of B tier, we're tossing the Barbarian in there too. The Barbarian fighter is fun, don't get me wrong, but pretty much all you're getting out of this is an increased weapon proficiency and some other feats. Don't get me wrong, I've seen Barbarians take a fighter archetype just for those feats, so getting them automatically by leveling up like Combat Grab on an Animal Instinct Barbarian, that's phenomenal. But they don't get enough to put them any higher than B tier. I think I'm going against my notes here. I think I'm actually going to put Barbarian in C tier. Thoughts change when you vocalize them, and honestly, you don't get enough from this combination. It's still good. Not only are you getting the increased chance to hit, but you're getting the increased chance to crit, and all of your crits are going to deal that bonus rage damage. So the bonus damage is going to escalate quickly, but I don't think it gets enough compared to the other dual classes. Oh, the Bard is actually a tough one. In my notes, I have the Bard in D tier, but I have something that's gonna kick it up to C tier. Inspire courage on yourself. Sure, you're gonna have to sacrifice an action, but are you telling me a fighter wouldn't sacrifice one of their actions to get another +1 on all of their attacks? That would be ludicrous accuracy. If you're fighting something your level, you're gonna crit. You're never gonna miss this thing. It's absolutely incredible. You're gonna notice a pattern going forward, so I might as well talk about it now. Spellcasters combined with fighters are good, but they're not outstanding. Sure, it gives the fighter a lot more options, but it's also going to spread out their ability score requirement. There's an acronym or word for it, like statty or something. I can't remember the exact term, but if you start needing multiple different high ability scores to function, you're actually going to become a detriment to yourself. Pathfinder 2e does somewhat reward heavy focus on 1 or 2 ability scores, and if you're playing a bard and you need strength and charisma and dexterity or constitution, it's gonna spread you a little bit thin, and rather than being great at what you do, you're gonna be okay at a few things. That sounds really hypocritical with the way I talk about alchemists, but I like alchemists because they're not great at one thing, but they're good at everything, not just a few things. There's a difference, I promise. So you might see spellcasters pretty low on the list, and I'm sure there's gonna be people in the comments with, well, if you cast this spell into your weapon at level 13, your damage is gonna be 20% high. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm looking at the grand scheme of things. And yeah, I think being able to buff yourself with Inspire Courage and Heroism is honestly also a good point for any other caster, but it's not enough to sell it compared to something like Legendary with Bombs, because you're not going to be Legendary with spells. So spells that don't require attack rolls are going to be good, and that's probably how you'd want to build this. If you dual class Fighter with a Spellcaster, you're probably just going to forego the Spellcaster's ability score and just go with spells that don't use your attack roll or DC. Ooh. If you want to talk about a redemption arc from C tier to S tier, the Champion Fighter dual class is terrifying. Do you want your character to be legendary with all weapons and legendary with all armors, and they can heal themselves, and they get fighter feats and class features? Dual class fighter champion. You are unkillable, and you're a killing machine. There's not much more to say. The champion's biggest boon is its class features, which is why nobody takes the champion archetype, as it doesn't do you any favors. But if you can take the champion class features and glue them to your fighter, you are a monster. You're going to have the highest AC and the highest accuracy and the highest damage, except for maybe a fighter barbarian on the team. There's just no way to get around how good this is. Plus, champions have higher saving throws than fighters, so it's going to make up for that weakness too. Fighters' saving throw, Fighter saving throws don't grow that well from level 1 to 20, but the champion ends with at least Master in 2 of them. That's better than the fighter, so basically the champion's class features make up for all the weaknesses of the fighter, and they get some cool focus spells to boot that don't typically require any kind of spell DC, like Lay on Hands. Gross. Easy S tier. Well done, champion. You did it. Along a similar vein to the champion is the Cleric. There's something very scary about a fighter that can heal themselves. And while you'd think this would put them up there with champion, they don't get much better saving throws and they don't get much better options. Lay on Hands is just about as good as the heal spell, and it's a focus spell, so it comes back. Clerics do get their free spell slots per day based on charisma for the heal spell. So if you pick fighter with a Cleric of the healing domain, not domain, whatever it's called, you get those 3 free heal spells a day of your highest spell slot. That's huge. That will heal for more than Lay on Hands, and it's great. But it's not good enough to get it above B tier. Again, there's some great stuff here. There's heroism, there is the heal spell, there's tons of different buffs in the divine spell list that don't require a spell attack roll or saving throw. And those are great for the fighter. But compared to the flat, permanent upgrades of the champion, the Cleric just falls short. It doesn't give them quite enough. And again, maybe there's a single spell out there at level 17 that completely changes things, but this is based on very general overviews of the classes, and Cleric falls right next to Alchemist. There could easily be an argument to bump Cleric ahead of Alchemist, or even into A tier, but as it stands, I'm leaving it in B tier because it doesn't give the fighter much more than simple spellcasting. It's also prepared casting at that. We'll see later that prepared fighters are a little bit worse in my eyes than spontaneous fighters, because in the heat of combat, things can change like that, and you need to be ready to adapt. So preparing specific spells is a hindrance when you're in the middle of 5 things that can make attacks of opportunity. At that point, you'll probably want your non-somatic spells. But the fact that the Cleric still makes B tier should say how good that combination is, just with the self-preservation at its core. Now, the Druid is very similar. It's very similar to the Cleric, albeit with less healing. However, and I know I don't talk about the feats that often, there is a level 1 feat that instantly bumps the Druid up to A tier. And that is Animal Companion. An animal companion on a fighter is nuts, which is crazy that you can just take it with the Beastmaster archetype, but at least the Beastmaster archetype sacrifices some of your fighter feats unless you're playing with free archetype. But if you're dual classing with a druid, not only are you going to get the animal companion at no cost to your fighter feats, but it's also going to grow very, very quickly, keeping up with you and attacking alongside you, helping you flank, and not costing multiple attack penalty. Additionally, there is a really cheesy niche build out there that relies on wild shape and the ape form and a fighter whose weapon proficiency is in the brawling group. It's something very specific, and it requires a little bit of rules weirdness, but I believe it is all possible as written to get a fighter druid with 2 more attack. Not as a status bonus, not as a circumstance bonus. Actually, what kind of bonus is it? Okay, it is a status bonus, but you could still get item and circumstance bonuses on there, and it gets kinda nutty. But yes, for that reason and the Animal Companion alone, along with the entire Primal spell list, that bumps Druid into A tier. They still have access to healing if they need it, but they have access to everything else around them, plus their Wild Order, which is going to give them bonus stuff. If you pick a Fighter Druid with Wild Shape or Wild Form, and you can just grow claws, you're never unarmed. There you go. Now we come to a really unfortunate one. The Gunslinger. I love the Gunslinger. I love the Gunslinger iconic. But let me tell you, a Gunslinger fighter gets nothing. They do not complement each other whatsoever. A Gunslinger into fighter, sure, you get proficiency with all the other weapons besides your firearms. But a fighter who is already proficient with firearms, taking Gunslinger, that does nothing. All you get access to is the Gunslinger feats and the Way, their subclass. Unfortunately, Gunslinger goes into F tier. The biggest thing that you can get from going dual class with a fighter is that weapon proficiency bump. And Gunslinger Fighter just doesn't do that. Sure, you could pick a fighter who is proficient in swords, and then when you dual class into Gunslinger, they both rise up to Legendary by level 13, and that's cool, but I don't think it's strong enough to keep it out of F tier. They literally do not complement each other in any way, because they're not really that much better at what they can already do. The Investigator is good. It's not bad. It's not great, but it is good. You will get all the skill increases from being an investigator. You'll get all the proficiency and flat damage of being a fighter. But what really bumps the investigator up to B tier is the fact that with whatever it's called, I don't remember the name, but it's where you roll a d20 as an action, and you can choose whether or not to use that for your next attack. So if you're a fighter, and you use that class feature and you roll a 15, you're like, cool, I get to crit, I attack, or something like that. Devise a stratagem, that's what it's called. I got annoyed at myself, so I looked it up. Now, what does keep this a little bit low is that their devise a stratagem into precise strike does use intelligence instead of dex or strength. So if you want to be an effective fighter investigator, you're probably going to need a high dex and a high intelligence, because you also need to use agile or finesse weapons to get those bonuses. Now that's normally not a problem, but it is that intelligence requirement. It's sort of the same issue that a prepared spellcaster has, or any spellcaster for that matter. Now, it's not huge. It'll probably result in like -2 or 3 damage at the end of the day. But if you want any kind of good intelligence score, you're gonna need to sacrifice something. It'll probably end up being Constitution or Strength if you're a dex-based fighter investigator. So it's good. There's a lot of fun to be had. You can pre-confirm a ton of critical hits, which is just too cool. But other than that, it does fall a bit short. I'm tempted, I am gonna put the Investigator at the top of C tier. No, I don't think it's better than the Barbarian. Barbarians, I think it's middle of C tier. I do think it's better than the Bard, because at the end of the day, it is still a bunch of extra damage, and that pre-confirm is great, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's better than the Barbarian, so I cannot put it above it. That's the Inventor. So the Inventor fighter dual class is something special. There's a lot of ways you can play with this. You can use the Armor Inventor to make up for some of your armored weaknesses that the fighter does tend to have. Your proficiency doesn't go up, but you get all these bonus effects to it. Or you can go with a Construct Inventor to, similar to the Druid, get a companion. That advances. It can flank with you. It uses a different multiple attack penalty. Same nice things as the Druid. Or you can do what I would do and go with the Weapon Inventor, which just gives you even more options, even more damage, even more everything. The fighter is already incredible with a base weapon. Being able to augment it however you want is absolutely insane. Plus the Inventor gets all these bonus effects. Sure, you might not be using like explode or many of the intelligence-based things, but the great thing about this is you don't need a high intelligence to be an effective weapon inventor. They have so many passive buffs, and they have that one feat, I think it's level 6, where once per day you can quicken yourself to attack an extra time. On a fighter inventor, that's disgusting. I'm going to put the inventor above the druid at the top of A tier. It's not quite S tier because it doesn't give that crazy power spike, but it does give you so many more options, and these are powerful options that a fighter should not have access to. The Magus. There's literally nothing to say here. There's literally nothing to say here. The Magus Fighter is the single strongest dual class in the game. Imagine a spellcaster with legendary proficiency at level 13 and can make a melee attack along with their spell. Hell, they can make a ranged attack with a bow. This is broken. A Magus Fighter is completely imbalanced. A level 1 Magus Fighter with a great axe scoring a critical hit could deal what? 2d12 plus 2d6 plus 1d4 persistent fire damage plus spell mod plus strength? That's 42 damage plus 1d4 persistent fire damage, all without spending a resource, by the way. That's a cantrip. That's a 2-action activity just for swinging your great axe. It's busted. You know, there's a reason the Magus does not get legendary proficiency in their attacks. It's because it would be completely imbalanced with the rest of the game. Fighter Magus, I don't even know why I'm still talking about this. There's no discussion. Insane. Oh, and then they get Arcane Cascade, which has the bonus damage, which does double on a crit. Oh my god. Monk Fighters. The monk actually gets legendary in unarmed strikes, and the fighter gets legendary in unarmored defense, and the fighter gets legendary in saving throws, and master in some other saving throws, and they get a stance, and top of A tier. I don't think it's quite S tier, but they do get amazing at everything they do. It doesn't have the power of the armored champion with its self-healing and its everything there. It doesn't have the same power as the legendary accuracy Magus, but boy is a monk fighter still brutal. It does get legendary in unarmored defense and great saving throws, which are both greater than the champion. Maybe it does get S tier. Maybe it is better than is it better than the champion? I think early game, champion is better than monk. I think late game, monk is better than champion. I think they both deserve S tier. Thinking about it, really thinking about all the stances and all the BS you could pull with monk feats combined with fighter feats, I think that's incredible. I do think it deserves S tier. Now that I'm putting it out of my mouth and speaking, that is actually insane. Legendary punches, legendary armor, legendary saving throws, and all their feats. The Oracle. The Oracle goes in C tier below Bard. It's kind of the same thing as the Bard, but it doesn't get Inspire Courage. It gets the focus spells, but those take a lot of actions if you want to activate your curse, and most of the curses aren't going to do the fighter part of your character any favors. Sure, there's the Curse of Battle, but that just gives you a +1, and if you're dual classing with Bard, you can just give yourself Inspire Courage on the first action of the first turn. It's really not that great. The Oracle comes with some serious downsides, and sure, they can't cast from any tradition. They're all divine, aren't they? Yeah, no, I think the only benefit the Oracle has over the Bard is that the Divine spell list is better for the fighter than the Occult spell list, but the Bard's class features mesh better with the fighter. So I am going to have to put the Oracle below Bard. It's gonna stay in C tier because it's still a spontaneous caster, which means the magic at your disposal is much more flexible, which, as I've gone over, is great for the fighter. So that's where the Oracle goes. Not too much else to say about them. Of course, there's all the curses and all their crazy things. If you took Curse of the Ancestors and got lucky enough to roll where it gives you a bonus to attacks, that's great. But if you don't, that sucks. I wanted you to be top of S tier, Ranger. I really did. But I cannot in good conscience put you above the Fighter Magus, because Fighter Magus is broken. Fighter Ranger is just powerful. Like, Fighter Ranger probably won't output quite the same amount of damage as a Fighter Magus, but it might. It honestly might, because a Fighter Ranger with Flurry is unfair. Because at like level 1, you can attack 3 times at -0, -2, -4. That's gonna be like 2 crits and a hit. Like, let's be real here. Maybe a crit and 2 hits, I don't know. But their second attack is gonna be the same as a normal martial class. That's nutty. In my Ranger deep dive, which you should go watch, I mentioned how sharing the flurry edge with a fighter is absolutely insane. So just having it permanently is that much more insane. Plus, they can take the monster hunting feats, and sure, they'd need to put some points into wisdom to get a good nature score, but they could buff themselves with that. It's probably not as great, but there's also the thought of precision, Precision dealing 1d8 on that first attack every turn, and critically hitting that is insane. Now, it's not as good as the cantrips on the Magus, because those scale, and precision damage scales very slowly, but it's still great. Plus, Animal Companion. Not as good as the Druids, because it scales 2 levels slower, but it's still great. Give yourself flanking. Give your Animal Companion precision. Deal that bonus damage. It's incredible. Just don't take out wit. Speaking of incredible, not quite S tier, but I think Rogue deserves the top of A tier for a fighter dual class, because a fighter Rogue with a maxed out dexterity stat is ridiculous. You're going to be critting, and sneak attack does double on a crit. So sure, you are restricted to an agile or finesse weapon, or you could even go full strength fighter on a ruffian build, which would also be fun. But if you are running dex-based fighter thief rogue, that's insane. You're getting crits on sneak attack, you've got a high multiple attack bonus, you're low multiple attack penalty because they're agile. It's not quite as insane as the Flurry Ranger, but the damage does scale more than the Precision Ranger. It almost scales like a cantrip, again, still just a bit slower. Plus skill feats. Do I need to say more? You'll be trained in everything. You'll be expert in everything. You'll be legendary in like 4 skills. That's worth its weight in gold. I can almost guarantee that on any of these dual class tier lists, Rogue is going to be in at least B tier, just because of the skill increases. We've got the Sorcerer, which I wish I had more to say, but it's pretty much tied, maybe just a little bit above the Oracle, just from personal bias. I think it beats the Oracle because it can use any spell list, but it still loses to the Bard because it can't buff itself. It's a spontaneous caster, so it deserves C tier, but overall, it's just a... This is the one time I'll say the Sorcerer is just a worse Bard. Yeah, it can't inspire courage itself, and it's just restricted to its spells. It might have some focus spells in its bloodlines that are good to augment the fighter, but overall, it's not that special. It's pretty much tied with the Oracle. It can just use any tradition. I don't want to do this. Don't make me do this. I don't want to do this. The Summoner. At face value, you might think, Summoner Fighter? That's awesome. You have legendary proficiency. Your Eidolon has legendary proficiency. No, it doesn't. It doesn't get that. That's the thing. It doesn't get legendary proficiency. Your Eidolon isn't made any stronger from you being a fighter, because it doesn't inherit any of its stats from you. So the Eidolon is the same. You still get the limited spell casting, which is cool, but overall, being a fighter just makes you stronger. You're replacing the Summoner with a fighter and keeping the Eidolon. And the Eidolon still shares your multiple attack penalty. Similar to the Gunslinger, not quite as bad because it grants spells, but the Summoner is the first one in D tier because the Summoner gains nothing from being a fighter. The fighter gains some spells and an Eidolon, but they're still linked in health. I think the fighter does not benefit from having the Eidolon out. It just makes an easier to hit target. The Eidolon does less damage, it's less accurate, it probably has lower AC. There's really no purpose here, aside from getting 4 spell slots per day of any tradition. Whereas at that point, you might as well just play a sorcerer. I'm really sad to put the summoner so low, but I am worried going forward that the summoner's not going to dual class well. We'll see. Time will tell. It might dual class really well with other spellcasters. That might be the ticket, but for now, there's just nothing I can do for you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, summoner. You just don't benefit from the fighter in any way. We got 3 left. And with Swashbuckler, we are going to round out the S tier. I do think it is bottom of S tier, but I think Swashbuckler is just a smidge better than Rogue when dual classed with Fighter. The Swashbuckler's panache is great, and its precise strike feature gives it bonus damage on every single attack. So not only that, but you're a fighter, you're gonna be critting, so that bonus damage is getting doubled. And the top of the freaking cherry on the freaking cake on the mountaintop of the world is the finishers. As a Swashbuckler, you're praying to crit on your finisher, because that's disgusting, and it's so powerful. They even have a feat that lets them crit on a 19 or a 20, regardless of their results, and that's like amazing. But if you're a fighter at level 1, you can basically crit on an 18 automatically. And their bonus to lethal finishers is like a level 18 or 16 feat. So this is dual classing, basically getting a better version of that from level 1. It's insane. You know, if your finisher is the only attack you make that turn and you're doing it at full bonus, you're probably gonna crit, and you're almost never gonna miss from that fighter proficiency. So even at level 1, getting that crit, let's say you're using a D6 agile weapon, you crit, you deal 2d6 plus strength mod, plus another 4d6 from your finisher. That's brutal, because I believe the finisher does add 2d6 on its own. It's disgustingly good. I love it. The idea of just a more accurate and deadly Swashbuckler is very appealing to me and shoves it, again, right at the tail end of S tier. You know, it doesn't get the armor proficiency of Champion or Monk. It doesn't get the BS offense of the Ranger or the Magus, but it's still amazing at what it does. And it doesn't require flat-footed like the Rogue. You are good and ready to go toe-to-toe and break out that finisher whenever you want. And I hate to say it, but I'm gonna clump these two together because Witch and Wizard are both in D tier. This is so sad because Wizard and Summoner are two of my favorite classes in the game. But, like I've said, a prepared caster does not mesh well with the fighter. And when we're talking about the fighter tier list, I'm thinking of ways to improve the fighter, not ways that the fighter improves other classes. And again, getting spells, it's great, it's good, but the Magus is just so much better because you can cast a spell and bonk someone on the head. When you're a wizard or a witch, it's either or. And sure, you could be a witch with the divine spell list, but you're not spontaneous, you're prepared, so you need to be sure to see what's coming up. Whereas if you're just a spontaneous sorcerer, you can just take the spells you know will be useful in a variety of situations and cast them as you need them. These guys are rough. I think the Summoner, is the Summoner better? No, I do think the Summoner is worse than the Witch and the Wizard. Is it worse than the Wizard? I think I'm going to put it there. No, it's still worse than the Wizard because of the limited spell slots. The Witch is above the Wizard because it can choose any tradition. The Wizard is there because Arcane is the worst tradition to combine with the Fighter. Sure, you might get some okay buffs like Mirror Image to make you harder to hit, but aside from like early game magic weapon, you're not going to get a whole lot of self buffs, and because of the nature of dual classing, your intelligence probably isn't going to be that high, so your spell DCs and spell attack rolls are always going to be less accurate than your melee or ranged attacks as a fighter. So there's really no purpose to rolling a wizard when you could roll a sorcerer or something that can just react better. But those are the fighter dual class rankings, the 5 best options for just a sheer powerful min-maxed fighter is going to be the Magus, which is just, honestly, I think it's this crazy. I think it is actually this insane that Magus deserves its own tier. I honestly do. I think Magus is so much more powerful than any other option for the fighter. It does deserve its own tier. It's kind of ridiculous. I would almost consider banning a Magus fighter combo. Like, don't do it to be a jerk. Like, if your player really wants to play it, let them. Just make sure the table is aware he's going to be stronger than everybody at the table. Where a wizard at level 1 might have like a +6, I think a +7. I think they'll have a +7 to their produce flame to deal 1d6 damage. The Magus fighter will have a +9 with their produce flame to deal 1d12 plus 1d6 plus strength. Plus an intelligence mod, which the wizard gets too. But it's just insane. It's just ridiculous. So those are my thoughts. I'm so sad to put the Gunslinger in F tier and the Summoner in D tier, but let me know in the comments, do you agree? Do you disagree? What would you shift around? How would you make your fighter dual class tier list? And if you enjoyed this and want to see me do more dual class tier lists with the other classes, let me know down in the comments. And if you have nothing better to say, just leave a cake, butter, fudge, peanut in the comments. I know you guys love that, and it's kind of fun to watch you guys do it. And if you haven't already, be sure to like the video. It really does help out a ton. I want to say thanks to all of my generous patrons, including a few new ones we've gotten. In case you didn't know, we did just release a new Swashbuckler homebrewed subclass, as well as some new feats. So if that interests you, you can check it out for any pledge of $10 or more by clicking the link in the description. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And until next time, no nat ones.